Thank you for joining me. This is Tim Rickson from British Boxing News. Today I'm going to be looking into the Lomachenko versus Ortiz fight that's coming up on October 29th at Madison Square Garden in New York. So obviously straight away, get straight into it. Vasiliy Lomachenko, 16 wins, 2 defeats, 11 KOs, and he'll be going up against Jahmaine The Technician Ortiz, who is unbeaten in 17 bouts, 16 wins with 1 draw and 8 KOs. So 50% of his victories have ended in a stoppage. Both these lightweights, they possess a very similar style. So this 12-round contest is likely to be possibly a bit of a chess match, maybe one for the boxing purists. I don't think it's going to be, even though the fighters are both explosive in the way that they throw their bursts of punches, I don't think it's going to be an explosive contest. 34-year-old Lomachenko, he's from Ukraine, so he's coming straight from, he hasn't fought all this year due to enlisting as a soldier to defend his country against Putin's Russian invasion. Now, you could sort of argue that absence from the ring, could that possibly affect him? I don't think someone like Lomachenko could ever suffer from ring rust, especially when he's had over 400 fights spread out throughout the entire lifetime. I'm sure he started boxing very early, around about 5 or 6, with his father, Anatoly Lomachenko, Anatoly rather. So I don't think ring rust is something that would affect him, because he's just a fighter through and through. I'm pretty sure someone like Lomachenko, he's like Tyson Fury. He could walk away from the ring for a year and just jump straight back in and do 12 rounds as easy as standing on his head. So I don't think there's going to be a negative effect that war and absence from the ring is going to have on him. And I think, if anything, you could look at it the other way, and you could sort of argue that coming from a war, that kind of hardship, your home country being invaded, something that I and many people in the world have probably never experienced or will ever experience in their lifetime. So something like that, your world being thrown upside down, being thrown into the front line with a gun over your shoulder, surrounded by soldiers and hardship. If anything, he could return to the ring as more of a hardened, possibly more of a vicious fighter, and maybe with added purpose now, because we saw that Usyk in his fight with Joshua, he was doing it for Ukraine. He was trying to show the world he was representing Ukraine, and he was trying to shine a light on his country's problems and hardships and what they were going through at that time. So if anything, it could make him a prouder fighter, a more hardened, aggressive, vicious fighter with this sort of like new added purpose. So for Lomachenko, obviously, after 397 amateur fights, just the one single loss that he avenged, double Olympic champion, double world champion, everything, gold medals galore. We all know that he's a very unique fighter. His style is exceptional. It's you watch him and you just marvel at what he does. And if you spar or box yourself, when you go into that boxing gym and try to replicate it, you just can't do it. So he's got a style that's just almost the most unique style that is now being picked up by a generation of fighters following him. Jahmaine Ortiz has got a very similar style to Lomachenko, and you can see the way that he pivots and sort of really tries to turn really quickly, shooting his punches out in short bursts. He's very reminiscent of Lomachenko's style. So Lomachenko, his father Anatoly, known affectionately by a lot of people as Papachenko, he insisted his son would take dance lessons before he was allowed to learn how to box. So his footwork is largely down to his upbringing, and being sort of told, you start with your feet and then we work with your hands afterwards. And it obviously shows. He's been fighting his entire life, so his boxing IQ is just as high as it could possibly be. His movement, his elusiveness, it's all just stunning to watch. And his opponents, it must be so frustrating for them to be in there with him. I think it's the sort of fighter that you watch him, you look at him, and you think, yep, I know what to do. And then when you get in that ring, you didn't realise that he was actually on that level that you thought he was. You know, you've placed him at the highest level possible, but then when you get in that ring, he's another level above what you've placed him as, and you don't realise that until you get in there. He's when he's not throwing a flurry of punches from awkward angles, you know, two come straight down the pipe and then the other two come around the side, and then all of a sudden they're coming from behind you almost, where he stood almost shoulder to shoulder with you, and he's throwing hooks in your face, and you just don't know where they're coming from. You're feeling all these hits and bumps in the head, and you don't know where they're coming from or who he is or where he's standing. He's got awkward angles. When he's not throwing those flurry of punches in front of you, from middles to sides to up to down to around the corner, he's standing in front of you and he's dipping, he's level changing. 1 minute his head is centre line, next minute he's dipped down, then he's slot changing. So 1 minute he's there in front of you, and next minute he's tilted to the left, to the right, down again, up again. He's always pre-slipping and flinching, feinting, you know. And when he comes in, he throws a couple of punches and then he turns you, and then he lead and throw punches, pivot, push you off, so that there's nothing that can come back. It's just all on another level. He said himself, it only takes him 2 rounds to figure out his opponents. And when you watch him in those opening moments in his fights, he's there, he's pre-slipping with a high guard to make sure he's not getting caught, and he's changing his angles, his levels, and he's enticing his opponents to shoot back. But what he's doing, he's downloading data, he's sitting there watching you, he's tilting to the right, he's slipping to the right, but not throwing anything, and he's watching your little movements that are coming back. He's such a cerebral fighter. He does all these movements just to study his opponent's reactions. And after he's collected all that research within the first 3 to 6 minutes, let's say, then he goes to work for the next 10 rounds and just dominates all the way to the final bell. And you see a lot of his, unanimous decision wins. There'll be, sort of 10 rounds to 2, 9 rounds to 3. And I think that's because he spends a couple of rounds just sort of working you out. What are you going to do when I do this? Oh, when I slip to the left, you drop your right hand here. You do this, you do that. Your left leg, your back leg swings around when you throw a jab. So I'm going to do this to counteract that. It's all study, data downloading and just collecting information from his opponents until he knows what to do and when to do it. So, again, obviously I've talked a lot about Lomachenko. We will get onto Ortiz in a moment, but there's just not enough you can say about someone who's got 396 amateur wins and 1 loss. His defeats in the pro ranks, for me, only one was legitimate. The other one was not legitimate for me. It's a fight he shouldn't have had. So the loss, first of all, was against an enthused, top of his game, Teofimo Lopez, and that was in his 3rd weight division. There's no shame in going up against a fighter that was an undisputed champion after that fight, and losing to someone in your 3rd weight division up from your debut fight. So there's no shame in that. And the reason he has 2 losses on his record is because he has fought the very best fighters. He's never ever gone up against someone who's not, a big name, a big fighter. So, or even you can call all of his opponents a risk. They've all been a risk. I mean, his pro debut was against a WBO international featherweight champion, over 10 rounds. So no sort of, like the Brits do, there's no 4-round, 6-round learning fights against a journeyman who's got more losses than wins on his record, where you go in and you just get a few rounds under your belt and you just sort of get used to the pro ranks. It was straight into the deep end, a 10-round fight against a WBO international featherweight champion with a very good record, and he stopped him in round 4 of 10. And then straight after that, second fight, looking to break records, he went in against Orlando Salido, who won the fight on a split decision. He forfeited his rights to the titles on the scales before the fight, coming in overweight. I'm not sure exactly how much overweight, but it was a few pounds, I think. And then he entered the ring on fight night, 21 pounds over the weight limit. You're talking, 2-3 weight divisions over. Lomachenko obviously, put on weight, but probably nowhere near as much as that. So to go in against someone 21 pounds heavier than you, it's just something that shouldn't be allowed. Every punch is going to he's going to take it out of you. But that's what Lomachenko does. He goes in against anyone and everyone. Because he wants to leave a legacy. He wants to break records, and he did break records. He equalled a Thailand fighter, someone from Thailand, Sainzek Muangsuin. I've probably got that completely wrong because I'm not very good at pronunciations of names. But he equalled his achievement of becoming a world champion in the fewest fights. So they both became world champion in just 3 fights. I think Sainzak won a WBC title himself, and then Lomachenko he equalled that record, and then he went on to become the quickest 2-weight champion, then the quickest 3-weight world champion in the sport. I think that took around about 12 bouts for him to make history as a 3-weight world champion. I mean, obviously we're talking about male boxing, so I know Claressa Shields has broken that as a female fighter, but that's all such fantastic achievements. And for someone like who's a casual boxing fan, doesn't really know a lot about the sport, only really watches the biggest fights, an Anthony Joshua fan, if I'm going to be really harsh, you say to someone, he's had 16 fights, 2 losses, they'll probably think he's rubbish. Okay, so that's the sort of casual fans. So this is why this fight is a fight for the boxing purist, someone who appreciates the sport and appreciates greatness. So obviously that's a lot about Loma. So let's move on to 26-year-old Jahmaine Ortiz, who's a successful amateur in his own right. He won 100 bouts from 114. They've got a shared opponent in Teofimo Lopez. He lost to him, I think, over 3 rounds in the National Golden Gloves final in 2015. That was before I think Lopez was, really a fighter that could get stoppages. He also fought against Abraham Supernova in the amateurs, and Edgar Berlanga as well. Again, Edgar Berlanga, before he was a knockout artist, when he's in the pros, sitting down in his shots. But now he's 20-0 as a pro, 16 KOs, probably one of the biggest prospects in America right now. So that's a couple of scalps that Ortiz had in the amateurs. It sort of shows you his sort of caliber. He's up there. He's up there with like the world's best. Okay, whether he's a world champion or not, we don't yet know. We can sort of guess. A bit like Conor Benn. Could he be a world champion? We're not quite sure. He's got to sort of go in at that level, and then we'll probably find out. Me personally, I don't think he is. With Ortiz, I think he could be a world champion at some point, but not now. Not in this fight. Obviously, there's no world titles on the line, but I don't think it's his time just yet. So over his professional career, he's amassed an unbeaten record of 17 contests. Obviously, one of those was a draw. He's collected, I think, 3 WBC regional titles. I know one of them was WBC Silver, which is quite a well-regarded title. It puts you up there in the top 15. Anyone with a WBC Silver belt deserves respect in my eyes. I believe he's got a couple of national championships as well. So I think he's got like an IBF American title and another one to go along with that. So he's national champion. He's sort of got a few regional titles to place him right up there in sort of the world rankings, top 5, top 10. So he's up there and he's in around the sort of the world level fighters. But I think he's got to make that step up still. I don't think he's made that step up. He's only bout not to end in a victory was a draw against Joseph Adorno, who went on to lose his very next fight after that. And I think that's only his. I think he had 2 draws and a loss in a row. So three sort of not very good fights for him. But I think he's put on a couple of he's reeled off a couple of wins since. So he's still a prospect who's worth watching. So there's no shame in losing to Adorno. He's from Massachusetts, Ortiz, and he defeated former world champion Jamel Herring, who sort of put Carl Frampton into retirement, so our sort of national hero in the UK. So that's his biggest scalp in the pro ranks. And I think he won about 6 or 7 rounds on the 3 judges' scorecards. I think 2 had it 7 rounds and 1 had it 6 rounds to him. But he's a 36-year-old former world champion. That loss meant he had back-to-back defeats. Shakur Stevenson relieving him of his WBO title before that. For Lomachenko, yeah, a good step up in competition against Herring. Is the fight against Herring suitable preparation for someone like Lomachenko, who I believe is a once-in-a-lifetime fighter? I don't think it is. He's probably a good sort of step up in class, but I think there's another step up in class needed to go up against someone like Lomachenko. He's a switch hitter, Ortiz. He's quite like Loma. He's got good feet, good defence, good head movement. He's very good at pivoting off really quickly and sort of coming in at awkward angles and shooting out his fists in short bursts. Throws a flurry of shots. He's going to be a hard night's work for anyone. But everything he does, he just doesn't do it as good as Lomachenko, not in my eyes. Sometimes I think he leaves his head in the centre line for too long. He'll go in for a couple of jabs down the middle, and before sort of getting out of there, taking half a step back or spinning off, his head's there just for a little bit too long. He cops a couple back. Sometimes his footwork as well, although I like his switch hitting and the way he pivots and turns nice and quickly, sort of coming in from different angles. Sometimes he can leave his weight a little bit sort of unbalanced sometimes. He'll step in with a jab on the front foot, and then all his weight's placed forwards, and he can't sort of shift his feet or get out of the scoring line quick enough. And I think for someone like Lomachenko, he'll really take advantage of that. He'll watch those little tiny details. His foot just sort of being unbalanced very slightly on the front foot, and he will really, really expose that in my eyes. So, yeah, he's a good fighter, an exciting young boxer. He's got a long way to go in the sport, maybe another 8 to 10 years in the sport. And I do believe at some point he'll be a world champion with all that experience behind him. As long as he keeps progressing, he's got a bright future in the sport. At this stage of his career, Lomachenko, for me, step too far. I personally think, my fight prediction is that the 3-weight world champion from Ukraine will do what he always does, spend the first few rounds studying his opponent. He'll work him out nice and early, between rounds 1 to 3, or earlier possibly. Then he will expose his flaws for the rest of the fight. If Ortiz is on his A game, which he must be against a person like Lomachenko, surely this is his FA Cup or World Cup, if I use an analogy from football. This is his world title fight. He's going to go in there, he's going to want to represent himself, and he's going to want to really, really show everyone what he's capable of. And I hope he does that. I hope he makes himself proud. But I personally think Lomachenko, already a 3-weight world champion, far, far more experienced, will win by unanimous decision in this fight. Thank you for listening.